Welcome to Writer's Digest Presents. Hosted by the editors of Writer's Digest, this monthly podcast features conversations with writing and publishing experts whose insights will help ignite your creative vision, hone your skills, build your platform, and get your work out into the world. Welcome back to Writer's Digest Presents. I'm Editor-in-Chief Amy Jones, alongside Senior Editor Robert Lee Brewer, Managing Editor Mariah Richard, and Editor Michael Woodson. As we record this, schools are letting out, graduations are happening, and summer vacations are starting. So today we will be talking about books we choose to take on vacation, no matter when and where they happen. After a chat among the WD editors, Michael and I will facilitate a panel discussion with a few authors whose books we have read and enjoyed on vacations of our own. Hey everyone!
Hello.
Hi.
So, the first thing I want to talk about is what kind of books do you think of when you think of vacation reads? Is there like a particular genre or setting that just instantly comes to mind?
For me, when I think of vacation reads, I'm very conflicted because I know I've mentioned this before, but I've got 5 kids. So usually when we're going on vacation, vacation reads is like a very aspirational thing where I think of vacation reads as that stack of books that I thought I was going to read. And we end up going with plan B, C, D, whichever. So usually what I end up reading for vacation reads is shorter stories, and it usually depends on what my children are into at the moment. And that's just the reality. Like there's this part of me that would love to just sit down and read murder mysteries for my vacations. Like that's kind of what I always think of, but just something to kind of sweep me away, and it's like kind of more cozy. But usually what ends up happening is that, especially lately, reading a lot of like horror short fiction, because that's what my children are into, and it's a lot of fun. And then we will usually end up, because I love writing, we'll end up writing stuff and then reading each other's stuff as well, just because we're kind of a weird creative family that gets into that kind of thing.
Well, I won't call that weird. I think that's cool. I love that.
No.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, of course we think it's cool. I'm just talking about the people that are passing us by. This is weird, and I know like I shouldn't sabotage the vacation read thing right off the bat, but I remember going to a soccer game once, watching one of my kids play soccer, and then my other oldest boy was sitting there reading a novel. I forget which novel he was reading at the time, but somebody leaned over and was just like, well, what's he doing reading a book at the soccer game? But you know, so I don't know, just an aside, things that we think are cool, like I know like when I'm out in the real world, not everyone else sees it the same way.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I have been that person who has been called out for reading in weird situations before.
Yep.
Or unexpected situations, I should say. Mariah, what about you? What do you think of when you think of vacation reads?
Well, that's like also really tough for me. When I thought about like what a vacation read is, I thought about what my mom read when we would go on vacations when I was little, which was mostly just like whatever cheap paperback she had picked up somewhere. So my mom read a lot of horror, a lot of mystery thrillers, that sort of thing. And I think to me, like a vacation read is just like whatever you like to read. So personally, the books that I like to take on vacation, like my vacation reads, are books that I have been wanting to get to. But just like the nature of our jobs here, we do so much reading for work. So like things that I have been putting off, then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go away on vacation and I'm going to take you with me and I'm going to finish you while I have dedicated like personal reading time. So if you know me at all, I read a lot of horror, a lot of like dark fantasy, a lot of YA. So that's what I usually take with me.
Mariah, I am exactly the same. Like I just when I think about like taking books on vacation or vacation reads, I don't gravitate toward any one genre. It's really just I look at the list of books that I haven't gotten to yet because, yeah, like you said, like the nature of our job. Sometimes they intersect. Like what I want to read is also what I'm
Oh,
reading for work.
absolutely.
But other times I'm like, I've had that book for a year and I haven't had time to read it. I'm going to read it now. Which makes vacation reading weird because for me, because it's not always necessarily like light escapist fare. It can be like pretty
Right.
grim because it's like this book I wanted to read for a while. I'm in this beautiful vacation. I'm still going to read it. So I'm similar. I just use it as an opportunity to get to sort of reading for pleasure again.
My idea of vacation reads is almost entirely dependent on where I'm going and who I'm going with, or if I am staying at home for like a staycation because hello pandemic. I remember when I was in high school, I took a spring break trip with my mom and my friend and her mom, and I had packed. I don't even remember what classic it was, but it was like a Russian classic, Crime and Punishment or Anna Karenina or something like that. And when we got to the hotel before our flight, which was leaving the next morning from a town that was kind of far away from us, my mom saw that and, sorry, Mom, I'm going to out you on this one. She said, "That's not a vacation read. That's not a good read for the beach. You can't take Crime and Punishment to the beach." And so we made a trip to Target so that I could pick out some quote unquote acceptable beach read for our vacation. And I didn't like it. I read it, but I didn't care for it. And I wish I had been able to read my Crime and Punishment or whatever it was. So now now I take exactly what I want, which may or may not be,
Yes.
too literary, whatever for a vacation. But if it's something that I want to read and I'm in the mood to read it, then that's what I want to do with my vacation time, is read the book that I want to read.
Yes.
So I guess that kind of gets into a little bit of like the next question, which is my definition and interpretation of vacation reads changed over time based on that experience. Has it changed for any of you as you have gotten older or taken different kinds of trips or started traveling with different people?
Yeah, I think for me, I originally thought of vacation reads as sort of light fare, kind of like your mother, Amy. Um, but over time, and this is even with my reality of how it usually ends up going with vacation is I look at vacation as something for me and something for fun. So like the older I get, the more I start to just not care what other people think about my what I'm doing for the vacation stuff. So it's really just like what is it that I really enjoy? What's going to make vacation more fun? And then that just comes down to choosing any genre, like whichever genre is the one that makes me feel like I'm having a great time and I'm escaping. Like in a way, vacation is like, even if it's a staycation, it's like kind of an escape from your normal 9 to 5 or 24/7 or however you want to define it. And that's kind of how I look at it. Is like, this is the escape that I'm having.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
And I think for me, so I grew up in like a really small rural town, and we had a really great public library, but it was kind of limited when new books didn't come in all the time. So when I think about the books I would take on vacation as a kid, it was just kind of like whatever I could get my hands on at the time. And I think now that I'm an adult and I have access to things like Kindle, which I didn't have growing up, didn't exist. I think that I am just like more deliberate in my selections because I know my time is going to be limited. I have all of these books at my disposal. So what am I going to spend my time on? What am I going to take with me? So I'm not sure if that's like a definition per se, but just like my access to books is so like wildly different than it was when I was growing up.
And for me, it's more just like my habits around vacation reading, because at least when I was a student in college and I would go on vacation, because since I was an English lit major, we were reading like 15 books a quarter, that I would kind of need a break from it in the summertime. And then I'd go on vacation and I would consume so many books because I was like, okay, I gotta get these in before the new school year. But the older I get, though, that's actually changed a lot too, because and I didn't know this until I thought about it. A lot of times I'll bring a book that is maybe a little bit dense and long, because I just don't have the time to like get started on it even. So a lot of times it depends on the vacation, I think, but especially if I'm going like on a beach vacation, I might bring a pretty epic book so I can get a real like chunk out of it before I return, because I know that I have nothing else in my way. I want to get started in this, otherwise I'll never start it, because I'm intimidated by like everything else in my life that has to come first. So I don't know. I think my definition of it has changed, or has stayed the same, but how I operate around that definition has changed.
Interesting. Mariah, I'm a little bit like you now that I had been resistant to e-readers for a really long time, partly because I worked at Borders and they were, quote unquote, putting us out of business. But during the pandemic, when all of the publishers started sending out advanced reader copies in digital form instead of print forms to an office, I bought an e-reader, and now that has significantly changed how I take on vacations when I travel, because there are so many, I can fit so many different options on that little device and still fit it into my purse.
I was just going to say that the funny thing about e-readers for me is that like I will tend to take my Kindle with me when I travel. But then if I read a book on my Kindle that I really, really enjoy, after vacation, I will go out and I will buy the physical copy of it, just because I love to reread books. But I do think you get a totally different experience with a physical copy. And there's just something more delightful about like going to the bookstore and knowing that you already love what you're going to pick up. So I think that to speak to what you said about like e-readers putting print books out of business, that's not the case in my household.
Yeah, no. Well, and it wasn't the case at Borders either.
Right, yeah.
So Robert, you kind of mentioned this earlier, like, do your reading habits change when you are on vacation? Do you find yourself reading more or fewer books than you do when you're, while you're on vacation versus when you are at home?
I would say that it's easier for me to fit time in to read when I'm not on vacation, because I can claim it's part of work.
Right.
And also, like for me, I've got 5 kids, so none of them agree on. There's never a consensus, I should say. Like sometimes a few of them agree on something, but we usually have to do a lot of different things that different people are happy, and that cuts down on the reading time significantly. But yeah.
I know that I read a lot on vacation. I think I average like maybe 7 books a trip. And it's just because I am a very nervous traveler. So time spent like if I'm not driving, like I am a terrible passenger, so I need to keep my eyes off the road.
Same.
Or I'm going to be side seat driving the whole time. And for some reason, like trains and airplanes also give me anxiety. I think it's just, I think for me, it's a
some reason,
control
Maya.
thing. Like someone else is taking me
Same.
somewhere, and anything could happen. But like
Yes.
I'm just a naturally fast reader. So the last vacation I took a book, and I was like, oh, this will probably last me like the first couple of days. And I was done with it by the time that we got to our destination. Because like being trapped in the airplane, I was like, well, I'm just going to like really immerse myself in this text. And it was also a super enjoyable read. So I know that when I go on vacation, I'm going to knock out like a bunch of books from my TBR list, which is always really satisfying.
I do want to cut in that this isn't vacation, but when I go to conferences and speak at conferences, I have that experience, Mariah, with all the traveling, where I do read more when I go speak in an
Mm-hmm.
event. And I think part of that is like I like to get to the airport like 10
Yep.
hours early just so I don't miss my flight. And, so and I spend a lot of time, being an introvert, I spend a lot of time in my hotel room. So it's just, I can watch a rock movie or I can read a book. So I usually end up going with the latter and read the book.
I am not a particularly fast reader. I like to luxuriate in books, and that is vacation is an extension of that for me. So I think I do read more book. It also depends on the vacation. Like if it's a beach vacation, I'm definitely reading more. Not a ton more, but only more, I think, because I just have way more time to spend reading. Not that I'm reading particularly faster than I usually do, but if I'm going to the city or something, on a city vacation, I don't read any faster. I might actually even be reading slower than usual. Um, Mainly because I grew up going on really like relaxing vacations. We just like all got into the car and drove to the beach and had absolutely no plan. And I also grew up with a mother who read voraciously. She was a librarian, and um, I grew up being like, you can read all day, but you don't have to like read like four books today. You can read this one book and tell people how much you're liking it and stuff. So I actually don't think my reading changes much while I'm on
I
vacation.
do read an awful lot in regular life, but like you, Michael, the vacations that my family took um, growing up were the more like leisurely, relaxing kind, like go to the lake and rent a boat and just sit in this cove for hours on end, talking with our friends, or in my case, sitting on the boat and reading. So, and we would drive there, so I would take a huge stack of books. And I mean, we still do this because we like each other, luckily. But I still take a huge stack of books because we're just driving and it's fine. But Mariah, I think it's so interesting what you said about you read on planes and trains because you're anxious about the travel. I read on planes and trains, or I will plan vacations when I'm traveling solo. I will plan vacations to places that have public transportation so that I can use that time to read, because I hate driving so much, because I feel like that's wasted time that I could be spending
Yeah,
reading. I think like
totally.
we have started working from home during the pandemic, and those 2 hours of commute time that I got back, I use for reading now, which has been delightful. The one good thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's fun. So I recently took a trip with my parents. We went to Italy, a rescheduled trip from that was supposed to happen in April of 2020, and they have great public transportation in Italy. So I took my normal large stack of books, like I've done when I've gone alone. I read one book the entire time, and we were gone for 10 days, and that was, I think, the fewest books I've read in that amount of time in years. But it was different because I was with them
Yeah.
and we were talking about things and the experience. And so my reading habits change sort of based on who I am traveling with. I think more than the destination.
And that sounds like a typical vacation for me, bringing the 10 books and just having the one.
Reading one. Well, Robert, actually, can I ask you a question about that? My friend has two sets of twins, and they go on their love language is vacation, and they want their kids to see like the world. And they're also huge readers, so they go on vacation a lot, and they read a lot on vacation. And she ultimately ends up reading a lot of
Mhm.
the books that her kids are reading. Does that happen with
Yeah,
you?
yeah, it does. I do enjoy reading what they read just because then we can talk about it. It's one
Yeah.
of the things that got me into reading when I was younger was to be able to talk about whatever it was that we were reading. And there's something nice about reading something and not being able to share it with people. And it's like kind of yours, but I also find it a lot of fun to be able to like if I'm moved by something to be able to talk to somebody else about like what did you think
Yeah.
about this and what did you think about that that happened in the book and uh, that part's a lot of fun.
So how do you plan your vacation reading? Do you pack up a huge deck of books, or do you, make sure you know where the local bookstore is and find something there? Because I do a little bit of both.
Well, yeah, for me it is packing up a bunch of books, and I think I've mentioned before on another episode like uh, my family we love going to bookstores and uh, loading up on books, which can be very dangerous on a vacation because we usually, uh, even when we have like a nice sized minivan, like even that, like we can load it up very quickly with stuff. So um, it can be a little bit
Hmm.
dangerous. But like when I go up to Ohio, for instance, we're a blended family. We have I have two boys up in Ohio. One of the things that we always do is go to bookstores, and they they look forward. The boys in Ohio look forward to it. Um, Kids down here in Georgia look forward to it, and so we definitely do both. Books that we bring and books that we seek out while wherever we're at.
For me, I think like when I was younger, it we would just have like dedicated suitcases that like we would put all of our books in. My mother was also a voracious reader. She is a English teacher. Well, she was an English teacher, and now she's a reading specialist um, for public school. But like the older I get, the less that I want to lug stuff with me. So I usually do a mix, like one or two like physical copies of books that I've been sort of carrying around and am ready to finish. Because I have a hard time switching. So I can do an audiobook, I can do an ebook, I can do a print copy, but I can't go from a print copy to an audiobook in the middle. Um, for some reason, like that crosses every wire in my brain. um, so especially if I've already started a book, I will take the physical copy with me. Otherwise, I'm very lucky here where I'm at in Maryland. Our county library system is phenomenal. Definitely got me through COVID, being able to check out ebooks and audiobooks through their online portal. Um, so I usually will take out a bunch of books from the library and download them onto my Kindle, or if they're audiobooks, download them right to my phone. And then they just come with me in a nice little portable package.
I do both, and the older I get, the more I tend to visit bookstores where I'm vacationing. For a couple of reasons. One, I'm such a mood reader that if I pack stuff that I then decided I don't want to read this anymore, I'll just go to the bookstore and see what I'm vibing with. And because a lot of the times it ends up just being, it can be a really fun vacation story then if you find like what ultimately becomes one of your favorite books on the vacation that you're on. Like I remember, I've maybe told this story before, but when my husband and I were on our honeymoon in London, we had visited Daunt bookstore, which is a big bookstore in London, indie bookstore, I think. And it was like our first day there, and I had seen this book, Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter, and the cover is gorgeous, and I'd heard about it, And I talked myself out of buying it because I was like, I can just get this in the States. Don't buy it. That's silly. And then we went our entire trip. And then the last day we had nothing planned so that we could just kind of like walk around and act like we weren't tourists. And we went back to Daunt Books and I was like, saw it again. And I was like, I'm just going to get it. Like it's like 80 pages. It's not going to take up any extra space. And I want to say I got this in London. And when I went to check out, the bookseller was like, oh my gosh, Max Porter used to work here. He's such a lovely guy. We're really excited for him. This is like a great book. And I was like, if I hadn't done this, like that wouldn't have happened. And it is one of my favorite books. It's such a beautiful novel. And that was really like a learning lesson for me. It's like, go to the bookstore wherever you are and get the book, because then that part becomes part of the story for you.
I was gonna say I had a very similar experience actually in London. I was
Oh,
traveling
really?
there in college. Yeah. But the store that I sought out was Foyle's bookstore on Charing Cross Road. 5 floors. I think it was huge, like their equivalent of Powell's, but it's been there for decades and decades. And I was just browsing and happened to be there at a time when Zadie Smith's book on beauty came out. And that was her second book, I think. I didn't know who she was.
Yeah.
I was one of the few people who hadn't read White Teeth, which was, a blockbuster when it first came out. So I was just attracted to the cover, the British cover of On Beauty. It was beautiful. I picked it up, brought it home, loved that book. And I read it multiple times since then. Zadie Smith became one of my favorite writers, and I don't think that would have happened if I had, happened upon that book in the United States, because the cover was so very different. So also,
Right.
people judge books by covers.
Yeah.
Or pick them up by that, moral of the story, I guess. But also just going to a bookstore where something different was featured because, she was living in London.
Right.
And was a superstar at the time. But I do try to, ever since that experience, I do try to, when I'm going to a new place, seek out an independent bookstore that I haven't been to before. So like when we went to Pasadena for the novel writing conference the last time, Vroman's was nearby, and obviously I had never been there, hadn't been to California. So went to Vroman's, really cool bookstore, all kinds of twists and turns and really interesting layout. And I found some great books there. Same thing, there's an English bookstore in Florence that is tucked on this little tiny side street. You would have no idea it's there unless you are specifically seeking it out. But I wanted to know where it was I wanted to check it out, but I also wanted to know where it was in case I didn't like any of the books that I had brought with me.
Sure.
Which I guess kind of leads to the next question that we wanted to talk about, which is how do you decide which specific books to take with you when you go on a vacation? Because I have a very elaborate system because I am a planner by nature. And I'm also very anxious that I will end up without any books to read, which would be the worst.
For me, what I do is I kind of try to have I think of it like almost like a business portfolio where they say, don't get all the same of something. So like I'll have a poetry collection, I'll have some short stories, I'll have something a little bit longer, like Michael said, like the times when I am able to get started, sometimes like that's a good place to start, like an epic fantasy type of book, because I can kind of read that first 100 something pages to kind of get to know everyone, and then stuff starts happening when I get back home. But I'll just have like kind of a mix of different genres, different types, and then let the vacation tell me what I may or may not be able to read once we get there.
I think for me, it's just books that I've been meaning, they've been on my mind for a while. And sometimes that's because it's a new release and it's by an author that I already love and I'm really excited about it. Other times it's because a friend has recommended it to me, and I just haven't gotten around to it. And sometimes it's like, I know that we've talked about our personal canons quite a bit. I know for me, like with science fiction, my personal canon is a little bizarre. So things that like a lot of my sci-fi reading friends think are staples of the genre, like Dune, I've never read, which was shocking when I told them that. So the next time where I live here, there is a really, really lovely bookstore that has like a used section. And Dune, there was a copy of Dune that was like very well loved for like $2.50. So I picked it up and I was like, "You're next. The next time I am on a plane, I'm gonna take you." So I think that it's I often will use it to fill in those gaps of my own personal canon.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about it because I don't really think I have a plan, but I definitely, now that I think about it, I do pick probably one relatively ambitious book that I've been putting off because I just haven't had the time, and then one or two other ones if I bring even that many, that are maybe less ambitious. And I remember the summer before the Hunger Games movie came out, I was finishing the trilogy for the first time, and I brought Mockingjay in the car with me, and then like 3 other books, and I finished Mockingjay before we got to Myrtle Beach, which is like not something that I do. And then I was like, well, all I want is dystopian YA fiction now, and I don't have it. And so I went to the bookstore and bought a couple of dystopian YA fiction books and didn't read any of the other books I bought. So, or that I brought. So I don't have a plan. I should probably have one.
Well, if you want to borrow my plan, it contains multiple steps and contingencies.
Wow. Okay,
right?
I take it back.
Well, I will say it hasn't failed me yet. So, but it depends on if I'm traveling somewhere by car and space is not an issue, I will take more books than actually is possible to read in the amount of time I have. So
Sure.
If we're going for 4 days, I will accidentally pack 8 books. And I'm a fast reader, but that I can't do that.
Yeah.
And if I am traveling, again, by car, I will pack the ambitious book, the big, thick book that has been on my TBR list for a while, but I haven't been able to get to because of all of the reading for work or whatever. If I'm traveling by plane, I am much more selective about what I pick. I end up taking probably the same number of books, but they are smaller so that, number one, they don't weigh down my carry-on bag, but also I can put them in my purse for when I'm on the public transportation, and I can just pull it out and read it as I travel. The second part of my little contingency plan is I always pack a book that I have read before and loved, just in case one of my other books doesn't fit the bill, ends up being a disappointment, or multiple of my books end up being a disappointment. I will have that backup book that I know I love and would be excited to reread again. The third part of my plan is to try to take at least one book that is about or set in the place where I am visiting, because I really like I like learning about the places where I travel, even if it's a place I've been to multiple times. But I also think it helps set the mood for the trip in my head, because I feel like immersed in this place. Even if it's not necessarily, a book that's about a positive thing, I still feel like I'm in this place. So the lake that we go to, my family goes to in Tennessee, is near to Oak Ridge, where there is the nuclear research facility. And there was a book about Oak Ridge that had been written by somebody from there. It was a novel, The Atomic City Girls, I think. Not to be confused with The Girls of Atomic City. There's a novel and then there's a nonfiction book. I took the novel because that's me. And I learned something about that place that I wouldn't have otherwise known.
Yeah.
Or when I go overseas, I like to pick books that are set in that city. Which I guess kind of leads into our final question about your best vacation read recommendations. I think I brought 4. But so if somebody else wants to start.
For me, I'm going to kind of go back to what you mentioned there, Amy. I do like, as part of my diversified portfolio, I do like to have like stuff that I haven't read before, and then like have some stuff that I have as a backup, just because I can just jump in and even just read passages that I know that I enjoy if short for time or whatever. So for me, those are the ones that I'm recommending. I will probably mention this book like a million times during the podcast over however long we do this, but I love The Little Prince. It's just a book that I can read quickly, and every time I read it, I get something different out of it, just based off of where I'm at in my life. I love Edgar Allan Poe because I can jump in, and I always bring a collection that's got short fiction and poetry. That way I can, just depending on where my mind is at the time for what I want to read. And related to that, I like the Best American, and I should also mention I like the O. Henry series as well, but like the Best American Poetry and Best American Short Stories, I like to have those types of anthologies around because sometimes I am short for space. I can just jump in to a poem or jump into a short story, and those are sometimes really good. Now, I'm also usually trying to read novels as well, but those are the ones that like I kind of have as like my backup vacation reads that like never fail me if I need them.
I love that idea of taking an anthology. I hadn't thought of that, but I think that's
Yeah.
a great idea because not only are they those short bits that you can get into if you only have a short period of time, but I think for me, they would introduce me to writers that I might not otherwise have read and give me more for my TBR list when I get home.
It is such a
Yeah,
good idea.
that's one thing I like about it. Yeah.
Because I in my head I can't get anthology out of like school in my brain because we read too many anthologies.
Right.
And I'm like, that you can do that for yourself.
So for my recommendations, I kind of broke them up into 3 different categories because I hope to give everyone a little bit of something. So if you're into sweet romance, I'm going to recommend Brush with Love by Maisie Eddings. And we had Maisie on the podcast for our debut author panel. But then also On Rotation by Shirlene Abobi. This is the book that I read on vacation on the airplane. I just like could not put it down. It's phenomenal. When it comes to horror, going back in time a little bit, The Devil in Silver by Victor LaValle is a really great mix of like terrifying and funny. And if you're into audiobooks, he reads his own work and he's phenomenal. And also Certain Dark Things by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, I think is like a really good, read when you have dedicated time to just like sit down and really immerse yourself in that world. And then for shorter stuff, The Elephant Vanishes by Haruki Murakami is a really interesting, lovely collection. And there are always like stories that I like to go back to, especially like if I'm in the mood for one thing and not another. This has like a really great range to it. And then if you're into nonfiction, Fast Fierce Women, 75 Essays of Flash Nonfiction, edited by Gina Barreca, is a really, really great read. So those are my recommendations for today.
I'll start with my reread. Is a book that is so short and I take a lot of places with me because it's one of my favorite books of all time, which is Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt, and it's most beautiful first paragraph I think I've ever read, and it's takes place at like the height of summer, and is a really like unintimidating book to pick up if you need something. Another one I think is really good for vacation is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. It's a book in verse, and travels between New York and I can't remember the location of the other one, but there's a lot of travel involved and history and culture. I love that book. I recently finished Sex and Vanity by Kevin Kwan, and that is pure escapism and beautiful Italy scenery in the first half, and it's a retelling of A Room with a View, and I thought it was really fun. I've mentioned this book before on the podcast, and it's my ambitious pick if you're interested in it. It's Poppy Show by Leone Ross. Kind of absurdist, magical realism, stunning book. And then just kind of a classic, which is one of my favorite books of all time, is Summer Sisters by Judy Blume. Literally about two girls who go on vacation with each other throughout their entire lives. And no one does it better than Judy.
For my picks, I realized that in picking them out, normally when I think of vacation reads, this is something I neglected to mention earlier. I think I would tell you that I always take novels. I don't read nonfiction on vacation, but turns out one of my picks will prove me wrong. But I will start with if you like genre reading on your vacation. I know I do like to do that when I'm going to the lake or someplace leisurely. Anything by Jasmine Guillory, including Party of Two. I love her romance novels. They are steamy, but they are great fun, and I feel like the characters are real people. If you want a mystery thriller, Winter Counts by David Heska Wandley-Wyden. He wrote an article for our July-August issue last year in 2021, but this is a fantastic debut thriller. I think in the meantime he has won many awards for it, but the second one in the series is coming out soon. When I mentioned that I take a book that I have already read, almost always it will be an Ian McEwan book. I love Ian McEwan's writing so much. I think probably my favorite living writer, except remove the probably, definitely. And so on my recent trip, I took Solar and reread it, I think for the third or fourth time. And it's, the first time I read it, it was not necessarily my favorite of his books, but the more I read it, the more it's so messed up and cracks me up. The humor is like secondhand embarrassment the whole time, and I couldn't stop laughing. It's an excellent case study in a very entitled man learning his own real worth, I guess. And then my nonfiction book that proved that I take nonfiction on occasion and enjoy it was Gloria Steinem's My Life on the Road. I was traveling alone overseas for the first time in the fall of 2016, and her memoir had just come out in paperback, and I'd always admired Gloria Steinem, liked her from afar, but hadn't really read any of her writing. So I picked this up and I was like, well, I'm traveling on my own. I'm going on the road. And I didn't realize just quite how affecting this book would be, traveling as a woman overseas by myself for the first time, and having all of these people in my life tell me like, wow, you're so brave. Aren't you scared? And not realizing that I had been internalizing those feelings until I started reading this book and feeling like I can do this. I'm perfectly capable of doing this. And I would encourage you to, if you haven't traveled alone, you should do it at some point, because it's a very interesting and pleasurable experience. It's very different than traveling with someone else, which also has its benefits, obviously. So those are my reads. This has been so much fun. Thanks for talking about vacation reads. I am excited to read some of the ones that you've suggested. I've got another couple of trips coming up this year to make up for lost time. Hi, I'm WD Editor-in-Chief Amy Jones alongside WD Editor Michael Woodson. Today we will be talking with two of our favorite authors about vacation reads. We're thrilled to welcome novelist Stephen Rowley and novelist and WD Editor-at-Large Jessica Strawser. Would each of you mind introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your most recent book? Stephen, maybe you can go first.
Sure. I'm Stephen Rowley. I'm the author of 3 novels, Lily and the Octopus, The Editor, and most recently, The Guncle, which just came out in paperback last month, which is a story about Patrick O'Hara, a sort of semi-retired television star living a reclusive life in the California desert when he is tasked with taking in his young niece and nephew for the summer after a family tragedy, which leads to a season of healing for all 3 of them.
And it had the best trailer ever. The best book trailer I've ever seen.
Yeah, I summoned my inner Reese Witherspoon, my inner Elle Woods, and did a spoof of her Harvard video application from Legally Blonde to launch the book. But yeah, I had a lot of fun doing that.
No, I'm going to have to look that up. I haven't seen that.
It puts all other book trailers ever made to shame.
Okay.
They're not worthy. And I'm Jessica Strawser. I came up as editorial director at Writer's Digest for many years, and now I'm a full-time novelist. I'm an author of 5 novels. I have a new paperback out this year for A Million Reasons Why, which came out in hardcover last year, but you might have missed it because we were in lockdown still. There was a pandemic on. And my new novel is called The Next Thing You Know. And it is the story of an end-of-life doula who takes on a cult favorite musician as a client. And he is grappling with physically losing the ability to play his guitar. And it's about the connection that forms between the two of them. And it was just named People Magazine Best New Book in April. So that was really exciting.
I saw that, yeah.
Oh, congratulations. That's awesome.
Thanks.
So before we recorded this, we had a very long editor's chat for the podcast about vacation reads and how we decide what books we're going to take on vacation. And the gist of it was we pick books from our TBR piles that we are really, really excited about and haven't had dedicated time to read because of work and life. And so in a way, they're books that we're fairly certain we're fairly convinced ahead of time that we are going to enjoy, so they have earned that spot in our luggage. What do you think of when you think of vacation reads? Is it a genre or a style of writing or something else entirely?
It's purely by weight of the book. If it's 800 pages, it's not going to fit in my carry-on. I'm sorry. No, I still love reading hard copies of books, but I bought, finally, my husband actually got me a Kindle as a gift. Because I truly was like going on tour, like what book should I bring with me or on vacation, based on how difficult they would be to lug around with me. So now I have both. I read it paper at home and when I travel. Other considerations can come into play.
I think for me, vacation reading, if it's a road trip, usually starts in the car too on an audiobook. I almost always have an audiobook going and either a print book or a book on my Kindle going. And I agree with what you said, Amy. I think, for me, when I typically read, it's like before I go to bed each night, just for a little bit, just depending on how much time I have. It's very often only, I read every day, but very often it's only for maybe 20 minutes. And for me, vacation is a time where you have time to really sink in and read for hours at a stretch, on the beach or on a balcony with a view somewhere or somewhere with a view. So I love if it's a book that I've been looking forward to for a long time, something that feels like a reward when you finally get on that trip. you've been looking forward to. But I also sometimes think about how there are some people who really only read on vacation. You know, I think for some people, the book they take on vacation might be the only book that they read all year, which is very different from my experience. But I think some people save up like the only books they're going to read that year, and that's what they take with them.
Yeah, I think, the more serious answer for me too is that something that I want to read for pure joy. That, I love my job. I love every aspect of it, but there's a lot of reading that is part of it also, whether it's done for research or professional courtesy. I'm honored when, asked to blurb, a book for another writer, or just having meeting another writer at a festival, or virtually now the past couple of years, but when we used to go to festivals in person and sometimes I would want to be like, oh, could we have a pact of non-aggression? You don't read my book, I won't have to read your book. We could just be friends. But the rare occasions for me when I get to just go into a bookstore and pick up something purely because it spoke to something in my heart and I'm excited to read it, that's what usually vacation reading brings to mind for me.
Oh yeah, I will save up books sometimes. If I know I've got a vacation coming up, I will save a nice stack of books. And I'm actually leaving on Friday for a vacation, and I've already started my stack of books that I'm looking forward to that I'm going to take with me. And this one is a road trip, so fitting it in my luggage is not a concern on this one.
All right, just throw it into the car. Mm-hmm. I have really positive associations with like vacation reads or vacation reading, especially like when you think about going on like a beach vacation and I just see all of these other people who are also on vacation, who are also reading. And it just feels like this weird shared experience that we're doing separately, but together. And so I just wanted to know, what is your association with reading and vacation, especially because you're, like you said, Stephen, your lives are really, in and around books, both reading and writing them. Like, do you have any memories particularly of reading a good book while on vacation?
Yeah, I think I will take a swing at other genres sometimes too. Like I do agree with Amy, like I will save something that I absolutely want to immerse myself with for the time that I do, that I know will benefit from me not having to pick it up and put it down 100 times, that I can really sort of get lost in for the day, whether it's by a pool or on the beach or whatnot. So definitely, big immersive novels. I love that. But I remember flying to Hawaii soon after Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl came out, and it was like everybody was and I spotted like several other people on the plane reading it too. Right. And a friend of mine was a couple, she was on the same flight, a couple rows behind me, and she was like, "You wait till you get to the twist. Wait till you get to the twist." And I got to the twist like an hour before we landed, and I stood up in my seat and turned around and like was like snapping to get her attention. Like I got to the twist. But I just remember that moment very carefully. But like reading something, thrillers are not a genre I generally read at home. I'm more sort of contemporary fiction that's more sort of like about human relationships and whatnot. So that I just remember it being like a really exciting moment, to being surprised or being surprised at being surprised was a really fun moment.
I agree. There's something about picking up something that's a little bit different from what you normally read that just feels more like a break. I don't know what it is, but I'm the same way where I read a lot of mainstream contemporary fiction, book club fiction, and sometimes I'll just be drawn to something a little bit different for vacation. I just read, I actually listened to on my last trip, Finlay Donovan is Killing It, which is more of a caper. It's a mystery, but it's kind of like this fun romp. It's so meta. It's about this novelist who she's in a Panera talking with her agent about her plot problems of how she wants to do her murder a little bit differently in her next mystery, and someone overhears her, mistakes her for a contract killer, and tries to hire her to kill her husband. And hilarity ensues from there, because the novelist, of course, cannot pass up a good story of trying to figure out why she has no intention of actually taking the contract job, but she's curious what's so terrible about this woman's husband that she wants to have him killed. So, it's just at some point you realize I'm just completely suspending my belief in this story.
Totally.
And it's just so much fun. And I think some of that is just that it feels that much more fresh and different to listen to. Yeah.
Sometimes I'm susceptible to a cover too. Like I just picked up The Swimmers by Julia Otsuka just because it has that beautiful pool blue kind of, swimming pool blue cover. And I was like, oh, this is something I absolutely need to read while sitting by a pool. So I don't I think, as a writer, sometimes we don't want to give into the power that covers can have, but absolutely. And I'm sitting, on the other side of this now too, because the Gunkel has such a joyous, bright, summery,
beautiful
cover as well that I know has attracted people to the book. So I'm like, I had to give that some real thought and realize like, oh yeah, covers actually do speak to us sometimes, especially I think when it comes to vacation reading.
So you mentioned the cover of your book, and it being so bright and summery and it has a pool in it. So do either of you consider your own books to be vacation reads?
That's a good question. I would say yes, but I also consider the cover, to the extent that I've always been obsessed with sort of the magical caregiver genre of stories. So the Gunkel was very much inspired by Auntie Mame, the Patrick Dennis novel. From the mid-50s. And then, I've always loved, Mary Poppins or Maria from The Sound of Music and all this stuff. And so to the extent that this is, falls into that category a little bit, I do think of the cover as a bit of Mary Poppins sort of spoonful of sugar, because the story, it looks like a bright, fun vacation read. And hopefully it is. I do think the book is very funny as well, but it has at its heart, it's a book about grief as well. And so I think, that I do think of that as a vacation read, but I don't mind sneaking in what's hopefully a little bit of substance to someone's beach read as well. But I promise you will laugh, but I think readers have been surprised by the depth of emotion in the book as well. But I think sometimes we pick a vacation destination thinking we're going to do these fun things, and it's something unexpected that will make the vacation really stand out, or something that we really remember. And hopefully the book is sort of mirrors that a little bit.
I feel the same. I mean, I always like books with substance, regardless of when I'm reading them. But I think there's something about a character in a novel who just kind of feels like somebody you want to spend time with, somebody who's really interesting, just like meeting this interesting new person who thinks differently from the way that you think. And I try to write characters like that. I think in my new book, The Next Thing You Know, the main character is, Nova. She's recently walked out on her entire life and left behind everything that's familiar to her, her hometown, her job, her boyfriend, and done this 180 and decided to become an end-of-life doula and help these people who've gotten a rough diagnosis or who are at the end of their lives, kind of come to terms and whatever that means to them. So, she comes at them like, what do you want to do with the time you have left? And let's do it. And she's got this kind of interestingly positive, upbeat attitude. That's not what you would expect. And she's also a real risk taker and very different from me. So I think I like spending time with somebody who's, different from the people who I know in real life and learning about something new on a trip.
Also, I would 1,000% read that on vacation, by the way, because I think there's no better time to reflect on who we are. Are we finding joy in life? Are we doing what we, then on vacation, are we living up to our full potential? I'm not afraid of reading about grieving or dying while on vacation, because it reminds me the importance of taking vacation as well, that we are only here for a limited amount of time. And so there is something nice about a book like that, Jessica, that I really think like under scores the need for vacation in a little way. And so it's a really lovely time to reflect on our lives and make sure we're living the lives that we want to in the best way we can.
That is exactly what it's about. And I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
What you both are saying right now is really it's really resonating with me, because you both write books that are like super multifaceted and wonderfully difficult to categorize or put into any genre. Like I've laughed out loud at both of your books and like bawled into oblivion reading both of your books. The same book, like one book, which is, I think, an important distinction because people tend to think of vacation reads as exclusively light fare, and there's nothing wrong with that. But from my experience, it's not necessarily true. And what you're saying, Stephen and Jessica, that's also true for you as well. So I'm curious if you could talk just a little bit from like a craft perspective, how you manage balancing multiple tones in one book that you're writing, how you navigate writing sort of both funny and emotional scenes without one maybe threatening to take over.
Yeah, Jessica, I'm curious to your take. Here, this is what's so great about discussions like this, because writing a novel, can often feel like a very solitary endeavor.
Yeah.
And so when I get to talk to someone else about craft, particularly something similar to what I do, and I do think it's the most complicated part of what I do. And I put in a lot of thought. It's sometimes very surgical, even the precision in which you go, if you have one joke too many in a scene, it can really throw off the balance of, the emotional balance of what the story you're trying to tell. And likewise, if you go too long without allowing the reader to take a breath through a laugh or, a joke or a lighter moment, that it can also throw off the balance of what you're trying to do in another direction. So it's something that I work, incredibly hard at. But these are my favorite stories. So if I can laugh and cry in the same book, I feel like that's just the wonderful reflection of life and how life truly is.
Absolutely. I think that's where I do pay a lot of attention to kind of the emotional journey that you're taking through a book. And I think that's where I really lean into my supporting cast to kind of come on and, bring a little, especially if one character is going through a hard time, have somebody else come in and bring in a little comic relief or, shake things up a little or make them take a break and go do something, that's away from everything else. And I usually do write from multiple points of view. And, so I'm very aware of one character's perspective having a different, general arc and tone from another one and the balance, between them all. Nobody wants to write anything that, like Stephen said, even if, it's touching on a big issue like grief or coming to terms with, Mason, and the next thing you know, it was interesting getting in the mind of a different sort of artist, a different sort of creative person who can't do the thing that brings him joy anymore. He doesn't need a lesson in how to go out and live life to the fullest. He's just trying to figure out how to do it without the main thing that brings him joy anymore. And his perspective is very different from the perspective of the person who's trying to, get through to him and help be a support to him and help kind of guide him through this. So, I carefully choose the point of view characters with that in mind as well.
So Michael mentioned that he has very positive connotations with the idea of vacation reads, and I do as well. And as we've sort of talked this through a little bit, I might know the answer to this question. But, maybe not all writers would feel the same way and have those positive thoughts about vacation reads. So how do you, feel free to be honest here, it won't hurt our feelings. How do you feel about us considering your books to be vacation reads?
Listen, I'm honored. As I said, Jessica really, nailed it. But I think, sometimes this is the only chance that people have to read. And, it really is then an honor, if someone chose a book of mine to bring with them. And yes, sometimes I get angry messages. I think I'm a funny person, but I've been known for writing tearjerkers also. And so I get angry messages from people that you made me cry on a beach or cry on a plane or in an airport. Like, how dare you? So sorry, but also I would be thrilled. I'm very aware that people have busy lives and that people don't read as much fiction, particularly as we all do. And so, when they pick a book of yours for their limited reading time, it's an honor whether you're doing it sitting at home or taking that on vacation with you.
That's the thing. I mean, I totally know why you're asking, Amy. I think once in a while there will be some sort of conversation that blows up, usually on Twitter, where
Yes.
maybe somebody will call a book a beach read, or a book will make a list of the top beach reads, and then somebody will get mad about that and say, well, I wouldn't consider my book a beach read.
Right.
You know, my book is more serious than that. And to me, it's just, I mean, this is going to sound like I'm oversimplifying, but if you want to read my book, I don't care what you call it. I don't care where you read it. I mean, I should be so lucky as to trifle with, you know, where you want to read my book. You know, like Stephen said, that's an honor if your story is the one that people want to take with them, regardless of why. If it's because they want to read something that makes them feel something, if it's because they want to read about something that makes them think, if it's because they want to read about something that helps them escape into a life that's different from their own, or distracts them from what's going on. I would never take offense to that. And the idea that anyone would is honestly ridiculous to me. I just think that those kind of discussions get super overblown.
Yeah, it is a little silly to look down at, you know, either someone for having commercial taste or someone thinking you are commercial. Like, there's nothing wrong with that at all. I might try to sneak in something literary in this commercial story that I'm trying to tell, but that's, you know, I consider that my job, and that's something I'm doing for me, and then first, and then for the reader second. But it would never take offense at someone thinking that something I wrote would be a good time, or might be an easy read, and I would rather pleasantly surprise them with something of a little more substance. But I would never, you know, if they go into that from the outset, then I have no problem with that whatsoever.
Just as an aside, I honestly hadn't thought about the idea that the truth in that a lot of people only have time to read while they're on vacation, Jessica. That's just such a good point. And it also feels like when I would say most of my book recommendations most naturally when I'm on vacation, because I'm seeing so many other people reading, and I know that they're reading those books intentionally because they brought them with them from home. So I think I agree with you, and I love that this is the conversation we're having, because like your books, vacation reads and beach reads are like wonderfully diverse and can cover any multitude of genres or plots that someone would maybe want to be reading.
Yeah.
And then I get to, because I'm seeing someone else reading.
I think it's hilarious. You know, Emily Henry is a genius, leaned into it, wrote a book called Beach Read. I'm like,
Right?
damn it, why didn't I think of that? Like, you know, and she's a wonderful writer too. So it's not, you know, you can, it was a very smart way to try to chase a trend in a little bit, and then hopefully write something that's surprising too. So bravo for her for just going for it.
Yeah.
It's like when people, I know this happens to romance writers a lot, when people will pick up a book and they'll call it a guilty pleasure. Like, well, I picked this up as a guilty pleasure. Well, why is there guilt?
Right?
You know,
If you find pleasure in it, absolutely. Yeah. Own it.
Yeah.
Enjoy it.
Yes. I firmly believe, and there's no such thing as guilty
Agreed.
pleasures.
Agreed.
Yeah, especially now. I mean, the world is a pretty heavy place right now. If something is calling to you to pick it up and read it, or bringing you joy, you know, no guilt-free. And yeah, I think as an author, I visit with a lot of book clubs, and so I'm very aware of how little a lot of people read. Very often when I will show up at a book club, they'll say, oh my gosh, we all actually read it this time. Like, usually even people who are in a book club, life gets away from them. You know, half the people in the room just showed up to drink the wine that night because they didn't get to their, you know, one title that month. So I am very aware that, there are a lot of people who don't read nearly as much, and they want to pick up my book.
Yeah, I've been guilty of rereading things on vacation too, because the world is like a hellfire right now, and it does. If you find comfort in knowing there's not going to be danger in a story, you know, I have I'm on deadline for a new book right now, and so you know, the writing process is consuming me. But I have reread the Heartstopper graphic novels a redacted number of times right now, because they just bring me joy. It's a graphic novel. I can read them quickly. You know, like. Sometimes I feel guilty, like I should be reading something else because I know what's going to happen, but it brings me joy at the same time. So, it is what it is.
That's actually one of Amy's stipulations for bringing books on her vacation.
Yes, I have a very long process for choosing which books I'm going to take. It's like a 3 or 4 step process, but it always includes a book that I've read before that I know I love. Because I don't often have time to reread in regular life because, again, reading for work, business reasons. And so getting to reread something that I love and that I know I'm going to enjoy is it's pleasurable to be able to do that, to have that kind of
It's
luxury.
like planning a vacation with a friend, with a good friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those characters that you want to
like
revisit.
I feel like that's such a lost luxury. That's so nostalgic to me too, because luxury is maybe the wrong word, but everything is so accessible now. I mean, I can pick up my phone and download a new book instantly from where I'm sitting, and I can do it from the library app and not even have to pay for it necessarily. But like when I was first learning to love books, when I was a teenager and even younger than that, I don't think there was a book on my shelf that I hadn't read 5 or 6 times. I mean, if my mom couldn't get me to the library that day, or if I got a cold and I had already blown through all the new stuff that I picked up, I would literally just read. I mean, everything on my shelf, I had literally probably read 5 or 6 times. I would reread everything.
Yeah.
And now, now I don't think we do that because it's so easy to get something new. I don't even really think about, I think that's so smart, Amy. I don't think about doing that as often. We rewatch the same movies every single holiday season. Sometimes we'll put on, like an old episode of Friends or Seinfeld, a show we've seen a billion times just for comfort if we want something on in the background. But we don't think as much anymore as we used to. At least I don't, about picking up books that we've already read. I think that's so smart.
Yeah, particularly because we can grow as readers as well. I recently just reread on a trip The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay because it was a book that meant so much to me 20 years ago. And I wanted to see, has the book changed in my memory? Does it live up to my memory? Have I changed as a reader? Have I grown as a person? Like, what will it say to me today? And I'm, thrilled to say I loved it just as much. But that was a deliberate decision to say, like, oh, I'm going to actually read this 600-page book again. But it really taught me something about myself a little bit too, which is great.
Yeah. So I think for me, setting and plot really play a big role in what I might consider a vacation read or a book that's perfect to bring on vacation. Stephen, particularly with the Guncle, I instantly wanted to be in Palm Springs with you and have the time of my life. The setting was so integral to the reading experience of the Guncle. And Jessica, your books have that quality where there's a moment when you're reading it and you know that I'm not moving from this spot until I finish this book. And what better place to do that than on vacation? Because as we've been talking about, life gets in the way and you can only read in like 15-minute, 20-minute increments. So for readers, we have that hook. But I'm curious as authors, what for you is that hook? Either in writing these books, like what was the moment of no turning back for you? And what are the hooks that you look for in your own reading time?
Well, I do like what you say about setting, and particularly in the Guncle, Palm Springs plays such a huge role. I do love books where setting is sometimes, an unspoken character in a way, and you can be so, immersed. I'm thinking like Beautiful Ruins, Jess Walter, something. Like I want to be transported to Italy, or I want to. Sarah Winman's Still Life, another book, that made me be thinking of Italy. Recently. So sometimes like setting is so important to the idea of a vacation or a beach read. And that may have been a subconscious thing, but now that you mention it, that's absolutely, I think something I look for, even if it's not the trip that I'm on, it can be like aspirational for the idea of planning the next vacation.
Sure.
I feel like I pay more attention to that, like before and after. I mean, if you're on a beach and you look around, like half the people have books with a beach on the cover, it seems like.
Sure.
But I'm there So I don't feel like I need to escape there in the story necessarily.
Sure.
I don't feel like I need to sink. But after I get home, when I'm wishing I could go back, that's when I will sometimes pick up those books, which is kind of interesting. Or before I go, when I'm looking forward to the trip, that kind of escapist. Doesn't have to be a beach, you know, like trip to Italy, a book that takes place in the mountains somewhere, just the novelty of that kind of story that transports you. But I don't feel like I look for that as much when I'm actually on the beach, which is interesting. I think for me, it really is the novelty and the idea of like the book is a reward that you've been looking forward to.
Yeah.
I very often will have a pre-order that comes in like the day before I leave. That's something that I've been waiting for it to come out if I can time it right. And there's that like anxiety that if the book doesn't arrive the day it's supposed to in the mail, you're not going to have it before you go, you know, like this comes out the Tuesday before I leave. So for me, I think it's more, to the idea of something that I've really been looking forward to reading.
And I've reverse engineered this, by the way. You know, I have traveled to Italy, and I remember coming home and I'm like, I just want to read Patricia Highsmith novels or something, because there was something about the feeling of that trip that I just wanted to continue, even though I was back home. So I'm like, oh, I can escape back into my vacation by reading specific books once I get home.
Yeah, I think that's what I do. Honestly, I pay more attention to setting after I'm back home because I'm so sad that I'm not going to leave again for a while.
Well, Jessica, your debut, Almost Missed You, starts on vacation.
It doesn't
It's
go well, though.
Exactly, yeah. That's, spoiler free here, but it immediately kind of...
No, it's not a spoiler. Yeah, it's about a woman who's on her... So the opening scene of the book is a woman who is on vacation with her husband and her young son, and he sets her up on the beach with like a pina colada and an umbrella, tells her to relax while he handles their son's nap for the day, and then abducts her son. When she goes up to the hotel room, they're both gone. They're packed up and they're gone, and everything they brought with them is completely, so that begins with the vacation gone wrong. Yeah, that's not an image you necessarily want to escape back into, but...
Yeah. But Michael, to circle back to your question, I think, I'm not a plot-heavy writer. I am much more focused on relationships and character and stuff like that. So I do agree with, something Jessica said earlier, like wanting to spend time with this particular character that if I'm reading on vacation or whatnot, character is something that's so important to me. And I do try to, in my own writing, give, a hook to a character early on that you are wanting to go along for this ride, and I do think like the highest compliment that I get with the Guncle is like, oh, I wish Patrick were my Guncle, or I wish he were my best friend, or, so many wonderful things about the character, even though he's not, perfect in nearly any way, because writing books about perfect people who behave perfectly all the time is not great reading. But so even though he can be a little frustrating, the fact that people still love him, it's like, I'm not detached from reality, but for like a half a second, I do almost want to like try to text him and be like, people are really enjoying you, because he's so, he's so real to me.
I think the biggest compliment for me is if somebody says, I like to write books that invite readers to sort of participate in the story and wonder, what would I do if I was in this situation? This is a very real thing that feels very authentic, like this could happen. And if it did happen, what would I do? What would I do if I was in this character's shoes? What would I do if I was in this character's shoes? And usually when I'm writing my way through that, I don't necessarily know. I know maybe how it's going to end, but I haven't really thought through, all the nuances. And the biggest compliment for me is if a reader emails or posts a message on one of my pages and says, I'm still thinking about this. I finished it last night, or I finished it last week. I can't stop thinking about it. I'm still thinking about it. To me, that's the biggest compliment. And I think it feels that way to me when I'm writing it. So when it feels that way to someone else who's reading it too, that's when I feel like, I've done what I set out to do.
There is a scene in A Million Reasons Why that, I read that book as an advanced digital copy from your publisher. But there's a scene from that book that still lives in my mind, and I can picture it viscerally, and the feelings that I had when I read it. And like Michael said, those are the moments where you're not going to stop reading. Absolutely. Unless it's going to make me cry. And then I will go somewhere by myself. So I have one last question. I don't know if maybe Michael has another one after this. I'm not sure. But since we were talking a little bit about writing, in thinking about that, the actual act of writing, do your writing habits change when you are on vacation? Do you find yourself to be like particularly prolific or not during or after vacations, seeing as you're working writers and, it's what you do for a job, but perhaps also for enjoyment?
I'm on vacation. If I'm on vacation, I'm not writing. And if I'm writing, I'm not on vacation.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would agree with that.
I'm on a trip
and
I'm writing on the trip,
It's hard to turn off though, because I do think like writing, I always think of it as an input-output endeavor. And one of the hardest parts about the past 2 years is we've lived through this pandemic of different variations of quarantine and not traveling as much as we used to is, sometimes the creative tank feels a little empty. Like I rely on travel and vacation and experience and trying new things and tasting new things and seeing new things to refill and re-inspire, myself creatively. It's all those details that you can soak in, that will later make your writing feel very rich and fully realized is that's the part of writing that you can do sort of subconsciously while traveling. It's just observing and experiencing. And so
I know a lot of writers do write on vacation. They'll post about it. Woke up this morning, saw the sunrise, got my 1,000 words. And it is hard to stop if you're in the middle of a project. I usually try to time things so that which I'm not going to be able to do that this year, but I will often try to time things where I'm really working overtime to try to get to the end of a draft or something before I go. That's the best, when you kind of need that distance from the project anyway. And so you actually need to be taking a break and turning off from it, and you can give yourself permission to do it.
Yeah. I think like Ellen Hildebrand is very famous for doing, like she'll go to a Caribbean island and she writes longhand and she'll post Instagram photos of a stack of legal notebooks that are filled with it that she wrote on the beach itself. And I'm like, but I guess that's why she's written 30 books and I've written 3, so it's like, but I'm not doing that. I'm sorry. I'm not writing with sticky suntan hands and I'm just not doing it. I'm going to enjoy the beach. So.
Well, plus I think when Ellen, when she does that, I think she's there for like a month or two.
Exactly. It's not her only 1 week.
If I was somewhere for a month or two. Yeah, I know. For me, it's like 1 week. So, but it's funny. I just got back from my first in-person writer's workshop that I've taught at since the before times. And we were kind of talking about, like writing when you go places versus, being open to the world around you. And I always think of this story when I was writing A Million Reasons Why. I was working on a revision, and the book is about a woman one of the main characters in the book is a woman with chronic kidney disease who needs a kidney transplant and has just discovered that she has this half sister, but she doesn't want to even let her know if she's sick, let alone ask her if she's willing to get tested and be a match. But everyone else who knows her is trying to pressure her to ask this person. So I was actually writing a scene with that character. I was revising a scene with that character, and I had to get this scene done on this flight to Albuquerque. I was flying to keynote this conference at the University of New Mexico. So I have this thing on airplanes where I will usually end up next to like a very chatty little old lady who just wants to chat with me the whole time. And I'm like, okay, I need to like make sure I get the scene done on the plane. So I have my like plan, I have my laptop, I have my headphones, I have my like resting bitch face on, like, do not talk to me. Of course, it's like this. Can I say that on this podcast? I'm sorry.
Go for it.
So,
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So sure enough, this little old lady, very sweet little old lady who next to me, and I'm just like noise canceling headphones, laptop. And then, so I get my scene revised. And when they said to put electronics away because we were about to make our descent. I put it away, and she finally started making small talk with me. And it turns out that she had just received a kidney from her daughter-in-law.
Wow.
So
Oh, no
I
way.
was sitting next to someone who had just been the recipient of a kidney transplant for a 2-hour flight and not speaking to her so I could revise my scene about the kidney patient. So I feel like there's a lesson in that too about like when you're out in the world, when you're going somewhere, when you're traveling, when you're in a new place, when you're meeting new people, if you're so worried about hitting your word count, you might not be open to those experiences, like Stephen said, that are going to, refill the well. I mean, what are the odds?
What are the odds? The universe is
Lessons.
talking to you. Yeah.
Speaking of lessons, to wrap this up, a lot of our listeners are practicing writers, and they are really eager and hungry for writing advice. And what piece of writing advice do you have for the writer who is maybe a little needlessly concerned about how other people might perceive the projects that they're working on? If they're worried that, is this too commercial? Are people going to see this as a beach read, which for whatever reason has a negative connotation for certain people? What do you say to them?
Yeah, we've talked so much about vacation on this podcast, but there's no substitution to doing the work. I mean, we need these vacations because the rest of the year we are butt in chair doing the hard work of writing, and there's no way around that. And part of that is trusting, I think, your own voice a little bit. My first novel is a book called Lily and the Octopus, which is about a man who wakes up one morning and thinks he sees a small octopus affixed to his dog's head. And okay, that's weird, but I knew, inherently, I knew what I was writing about was attachment and how difficult it can be to let go. So it made sense to have like a tentacular kind of metaphor for this book. But I also, if I had worried the whole time that it was too weird or too bizarre, or there would be no audience for this book, I never would have been able to finish. And it was the first book that broke through for me. I have other manuscripts that were more commercial, that are sitting on a shelf because they never were able to get me an agent or a publisher. And so I think sometimes you just have to trust that your voice and your storytelling instincts are right and authentic for you. And so that does involve a lot of like putting blinders on and not worrying while you're writing where you fit into into a marketplace, because the market will change and writing takes a long time. And I don't, I'm not a fan of people who try to develop a New York Times bestseller based on what the last one was. It's like the books that are truly phenomenon sometimes are because they are so original, they spark the next trend.
I think if you're following the bigger writing advice to write the kind of book that you like to read, which is, you would think is the most basic, but some people really struggle with that. I think you should write the kind of book that you want to read, write the kind of book that you wish you had on your shelf. And if you're doing that, your joy in the writing is going to come through. Your passion for the writing is going to come through. And if you're the audience for that book, you can rest assured that there will be more of an audience for it as well, without worrying too much, without getting in your own way and worrying too much about what that's going to be.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's fantastic advice from both of you. Well, Stephen, Jessica, thank you both so much for joining us on Writer's Digest Presents. It's been a real pleasure.
Okay, hello everyone. I am Michael Woodson, content editor of Writer's Digest, here with editor-in-chief Amy Jones, and we are joined by a very special and exciting guest today. If you follow us on social media or if you frequent our website, you will know that we started a book club, and our first pick is none other than the much-hyped, much-praised heist novel Portrait of a Thief by debut novelist Grace D. Lee, and we are so lucky to be chatting with her today. Grace grew up in Pearland, Texas, and is a graduate of Duke University, where she studied biology and creative writing. She currently attends Stanford University School of Medicine, and her debut novel, Portrait of a Thief, was an instant New York Times bestseller, a #1 international bestseller, and is also in development at Netflix, with Grace serving as an executive producer. We are so excited to jump in, so let's just get to it. Thank you so much, Grace, for chatting with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and for our fun conversation.
Yeah. Would you mind just really quickly giving our listeners a brief synopsis of Portrait of a Thief?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Portrait of a Thief is an Asian American heist novel, and it is inspired by the true story of Chinese art disappearing from museums around the world, and it follows Chinese American college students who are hired for a series of heists to steal back looted Chinese art from Western museums.
So I love books like this where it's, a fast-paced thriller heist novel, but it's not just a heist for a heist's sake. It is connected to those philosophical questions like who gets to own the artwork, and is it the country where it originated, the museums that ended up with the artwork by way of colonialism or warfare, or buying it through some sort of supposedly legitimate channel. Was there a specific real event that sparked the idea for this book?
Yeah, so I first read about these real life heists, I think several years back. And so I had recently graduated college. I was living alone in New York City, and I was just reading the news, and I found out that all this Chinese art was getting stolen from museums, but also all of the art that was getting stolen had previously been looted from China. And so, as a lifelong fan of heist movies and someone who believes strongly in the repatriation of looted art, I felt like there was a really fun story there and I wanted to read something about it. But, it wasn't out there yet, so I thought that maybe I would have to write it.
Yeah, something that I loved about Portrait of a Thief was that it felt like a character-driven book disguising itself as a plot-driven book. They're both so important to the strength of the storytelling, and the plot is page-turning. But I found myself really touched by how much the independent characters came through. And ultimately, what I found most resonating was their relationships with America, with China, with their definition of home, and their experiences within the diaspora, and how that seemingly propels the plot forward. In the writing process, did you lead with plot and then the characterizations came through the situations you put them in, or did you start from a place of character? How did that come to fruition
Yeah,
for you?
I love that you described the book like that because I think it's really true to, my reasons for writing the book and what I was hoping to convey with it. Um, in writing it, I think I outlined very carefully, and so I knew the major plot points that would happen ahead of time. But I think it was really driven by the characters for me, so it kind of felt like I'd given them a map and that I knew what their final destination would be, but the rest was more of them figuring out how they wanted to make it there, just because, the story, all stories for me that I love most are driven by the characters and their decision making and all the complications of their identity and their relationships. And so I wanted to do that with Portrait.
Did you always know that it was going to be these five characters, or were there other characters that you ended up not including, or did the characters sort of morph and get combined or separated over the drafts of the book?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I started off with thinking about these characters, um, I started off with these very classic heist archetypes. So I knew I needed a leader, a con artist, a hacker, so on and so forth. And that five was probably the bare minimum that you needed to pull off a successful heist. And from there, I started thinking about, what kind of characters, what kind of people would say yes to this, exciting but also fairly reckless, um, adventure. And so I started off with these five characters, and the process of writing it was really, I think, the act of learning them a little better. And something that I love to do in writing is to think about what a character wants versus what a character needs. And so that really helped me get a better sense of the characters and their motivations. And then as I kept writing, new side characters kept popping up. And I won't spoil anything for new readers, but there's slightly larger cast than the five main characters, and they they were all new discoveries for me in terms of the side characters, but the five main characters remained fairly consistent throughout.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, I five is sort of a lot of narrators and points of view to fit into one story, but I loved getting their different perspectives. Was any one of those characters, those five narrators, harder or easier to write than the others?
Yeah, I think that great question. All five of them obviously have a little bit of myself because I think that's the only way that I can ever write characters. Um, in terms of
Sure.
easier, probably Will, who's our heist leader, who's, his story starts and ends the book, and a lot of his, feelings about being a child of immigrants, about being the oldest child, I think are a lot of my own, just in terms of his ambition and his fear and his feelings towards art and wanting desperately to pursue art, but also being afraid of what it means to give it his all. So that's my relationship with writing in a nutshell. And then it was a little easier to write him because those are things that I'm constantly thinking of. Um, and then Lily, who is our getaway driver, I think I struggled a bit writing her because her story is very personal in terms of she's also from a small town in Texas. She's coming to terms with what it means to be Chinese American and finding out, where she can belong and where she can call home. And that's something that I really, really struggled with, growing up and in my teens and even in college. And so it felt a little bit like stepping back in time and trying to grapple with all those big,
Hmm.
complicated,
Wow.
difficult emotions.
I have a different question, but this is I want to ask too. Like, I also uh I'm really like I can't get Irene out of my head particularly, and I think it's because she's just so complicated and
Mhm.
in a sneaky way sometimes feels like the main character to me. And I was just curious, like, because Will and Irene are siblings, like, what was
Mhm.
that experience writing that relationship while other people are surrounding them that don't have the same history that they have together?
Yeah, I love that you brought it up because I love Irene, and I love writing sibling relationships. So I'm the
Mm,
oldest of three. I have a younger sister who, majored in global affairs and is so competent and so smart. And I think that I always love thinking about siblings just because, you know, I wanted to write about people who very clearly love each other,
yeah,
but also feel this unspoken competition there where they always think the other one is doing everything they can do, but better. And, how it feels to grapple with that in the context of a
yeah,
heist where the stakes are so high. And so I love Irene. I loved writing her. I think
yeah.
that she's so competent, but also, she's so prickly and afraid of being vulnerable, and I think that was really fun and rewarding to write as she, grows from
Yeah.
that.
So there's this quality of Portrait of a Thief that is sort of like knowing and fun. Like there's so many references to heist movies and the Fast and Furious franchise, which I like stubbornly love all of the Fast and Furious movies. Um, do you too?
Me too, me
Uh,
too.
but I think it was kind of a stroke of genius to go against convention and make it less perfect and a little bit more messy. Their heists are loud and fast and amateurish because they're literally amateurs. I guess was this particularly challenging? Like, did you ever feel like you wanted to make it like more sleek and sophisticated at any point?
Yeah, I thought about it. So a lot of the research that the crew does, paralleled the research that I did in writing this book, which was, watching the Ocean's movie, rewatching the Ocean's movies, rewatching
Yeah,
all the Fast and Furious movies, and obviously those are so sleek and so much fun. And so I was like, I would love to do something, like that. But on the other hand, the heists are inspired by, true stories. So I drew on a lot of what actually happened during the heist. And then a lot of my research also involved reading books about like art theft throughout history and how these sort of crimes typically occur, which are, very often these like fast, like smash and grab jobs as opposed to the very intricately
Right.
planned out heist that we see in movies. And so all of that was on my mind in terms of thinking how I wanted these characters to pull off a heist. And also, as I was writing this, I was like, you know, man, like we're really limited by the scope of like my own ability in pulling off a heist. And I think that like what I would do and what, I think is feasible for college students really, comes within these
Right.
constraints where I don't think that they could pull off something that we see in, Fast and Furious or Oceans, And so I wanted to be a little bit realistic, but also, have some fun.
I love hearing that. And something else that I loved about the characters that kind of goes into what we're saying is that they really felt like real college students to me, like real young people who are on the precipice of change, of trying to figure out their next move. And I think a lot of that is in the strength of the dialogue, but I am curious if you could talk a little bit from a craft perspective. What is your advice for writing authentic characters?
Yeah, that is a great question. I'm not sure I'm qualified to give, like blanket advice,
Oh,
but I will say that in terms of writing these characters, I, spent a long time thinking about them and getting to know them a little better. And so for me, I have, my Scrivener document, and then I have individual pages for each character. And so I write out, of course, what they want, what they need, and then these key characteristics of them. I walk whenever I go on walks, I'm constantly thinking about them. And so I write down, things that I know about them, how they would respond in certain situations, just because, five is a large cast, and I wanted to make sure that they were all distinct. But I also think a lot of what went into making them hopefully feel real as college students was my own experiences back then. And obviously, none of them are like one for one
mhm.
me, but also, a lot of their fears about being on the brink of change and graduating and who they want to be and what they will become and whether, they will achieve their dreams. That was me. I started writing this like when I was fresh out of
Yeah.
college, and so I wanted to write it for, the person that I was at, 21 and how afraid I was of the future, but also, I was a little bit excited. And so I think a lot of it came to just keeping that very specific audience in mind, which was me at 21 years old.
No, I think you did. I think you did such a great job with that because looking back, at where I was at that point in my life, I did recognize so many of those. What am I going to do? What am I going to do after I graduate? And I spent
Right.
last week with my cousin who just graduated from high school, so it's, I even recognize some of that in her having to decide what she's going to do with the next part of her life. I want to go
Yeah.
back to what you said about researching. You said you rewatched the Fast and Furious movies and the Oceans movies. I like the Oceans movies; those are mine. um, but I,
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
yeah, those two.
But I wondered, did you do any? Like, did you go to museums and make special note of where the security cameras are in the corners? Or did you, go to any drag races to see, or street races to see how those work in like real life versus what's being filmed?
Yeah, I'll confess that I have not gone to a real life street race. A lot of my Duke friends messaged me after reading my book, and they were like, "What kind of college experience like were you having while we weren't around?" And I was like, "No, no, no.
Where did this
Like
come
this is
from?
fiction." Apparently, there are actual, drag races in Durham, North Carolina, but
Hmm.
and they were not part of my
Wow.
experience in college, unfortunately. But I'm a tour guide at the Stanford Art Museums, and so I felt very lucky in that I could walk around
Oh,
there
wow.
with my little badge, feeling very official, and scope out everything that was going on there. So I think that a lot of the museum research I was hoping to, be as realistic as possible.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. That's awesome. I didn't know you were a tour guide.
Yeah, yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I mean, the museums are great. They some of the people who work at the museum recently told me that they started reading my book. They asked me to describe it to them, and I was like, it's
Like,
about my deep love of museums.
there's also a real sense of energy in Portrait of a Thief, and I think that has a lot to do with its pacing. I love the way it's paced, and I'm just curious, how did you maintain a consistent urgency throughout? Did you find yourself ever wanting to linger longer on anything, or did you just know instinctively when to slow scenes down or to speed them up?
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that because pacing, I think, for many years has been my constant struggle, just because
Oh,
my my preference is always to linger. So I,
me too.
I this is my first book ever published. It's not the first book I've ever written. And so when I've worked with my agent in the past, I remember very vividly one conversation that we had where my agent told me, this scene is so beautiful that you
Yeah.
almost make me forget that nothing happens in it. And I was like, that is really, what I tend towards if I'm not careful is just to have,
Yeah.
you know, beautiful scenes where, they're just talking about their feelings and nothing is moving forward with the plot just because, I love characters. So it was a very conscious decision. And part of it was, I was like, this is a heist, the pacing has to, match that. And so a lot of my attitude toward pacing, I think some of the best advice I've ever gotten is just to make sure that the reader always has a reason to keep going forward. And so it's just about constantly building the tension where, there's a difference between a scene where the characters are talking and, there's no sense of forward momentum versus, if you write that exact scene, but then they're also worrying about what's happening next. They think to themselves, oh, like right now
Yeah.
things are going well, but that could change in an instant. Just even adding in those little details of like dread or
Hmm.
tension or nervousness makes a big
Yeah.
difference. And so that's definitely something that I'm always thinking about.
Kind of related to that, like any good heist movie or book, the characters in this get into some pretty tight situations that seem kind of impossible to get out of. And you said you plotted quite a bit in advance, but as you were drafting, did you ever write yourself into a corner where you didn't know how you would get them out of the situation? And how did you work through those problems?
Yeah, so definitely, I think luckily for the big plot points, I had them plotted out in advance because I knew that if I didn't, I would end up in exactly that
Mm.
situation. They would be in a museum, the sirens would be, going off, and then if I didn't have it planned out, they would just get caught
Yeah.
in jail because I couldn't figure
Right.
out a way. But so I had the big moments planned out because I was hoping to avoid some of that. But a lot of the moments in between, there would be times where characters would be talking or they'd be planning out something. I'd be like, where are they going? What's happening next? And I think my attitude towards getting stuck is I'm a little aggressive with deleting.
Oh, wow.
Um, and so what I do is if a scene isn't working, I backtrack to when it was working, like the previous scene or the scene before
Hmm.
that, and then I just axe
Wow.
everything that I've written. I stick it, in somewhere else where I can, reference it in the future. But then I start writing again, and then I go in a different direction. Because usually I find that when I get stuck, at least, it's not that I'm stuck at one specific point. It's that, I've written myself down the only path a scene can take me.
Wow.
Um, and so if I can't go forward there, it's harder for me to force it to go somewhere else. And I'd rather just cut off the
Hmm.
scene and then go in a completely different direction. And usually that works out okay. I mean, often I will end up, pacing in circles around my apartment or just
Sure.
thinking out a scene and, it will take a while, but eventually you figure it out.
That's
Yeah.
really thoughtful, though. I think a lot of
Yeah.
writers have a hard time. Personally, I have a really hard time. I'm so married to everything I write. I'm like, no, that's perfect. Why would I change it? And then someone shows me another perspective where it's like, maybe try it, and it makes it hopefully stronger. But I think that's important for other writers to hear because obviously it
Hmm.
works for you.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get the feeling of like being married to a certain bit because I'll write a sentence and then I'll like structure a whole scene around it because I'm like, oh, this sounds so nice. And I think the only thing that's really helped me is having this like big Scrivener document where I can very easily, copy and paste things over. Where I'm like, okay, like it's fine. I'm not, deleting it permanently. I'm just
Hmm.
moving it to a different portion. And if, I want it back, I can very easily get it back. So nothing goes away forever. My
Yeah,
my
yeah.
deleted folder just balloons larger and larger.
Sure.
But I do like that idea of going back to the last part where it was working in like choosing a different pathway for the characters. Like you know where you want them
Yes.
to end up with that larger plotting. But if they've got multiple
Mhm.
avenues to get there and this one doesn't work, trying one of the other ones, that makes so much sense. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, thank you. It's because I've had a lot of false starts in the
Have
past.
you?
Sure.
Well, if it's okay, I want to talk about the ending just a little bit and give like fair warning that I do want to ask about something that will be spoilers for people who haven't read it. So if you're listening and you haven't read it, here's where you want to pause and come back to it, come back to the podcast after you've read the ending of the book. Because I do love the ending to this book.
Yes.
I had an English professor once who helped me figure out that there's a difference between the ending that I want for the characters and the ending
Mhm.
that's right for the characters. And, so after the characters in your story got through their first heist, I didn't know what kind of ending I wanted for them, but I knew it wouldn't
Mhm.
be right for them to be able to pull off all 5 heists on their own without being caught because of what we were talking about earlier. They're college students and this is
Mhm.
their first time
Yeah.
doing
Right.
this. So I was thrilled when you didn't have them pull them all off, but you still had a way for them to, be successful in getting that art back to China where it belonged. So how many endings did you try before landing on this one that worked so well? Or was there a version? Did you write an ending where, perhaps they weren't entirely successful?
Oh.
So for me, when I start off thinking about a book, um, I need to have the beginning and the ending in mind to actually
Mm.
write it. And so that's the place that I come from when I start and sit down thinking about the characters and writing out the story. So I always kind of knew that that's how I wanted it to end. And I think part of it was, practical. Like there was no way that they could pull it off. And also, even if they could, there was no way I could conceivably write 5 heists into a single, like reasonably sized novel. Um,
Right.
but part of it also was that I wanted to talk about, the institutional responsibility of that,
Hmm.
museums have toward looted art, where, of course, this crew is stealing back this art and it's for a good cause. And, I
Hmm.
love them, love writing about them getting up to these crimes for the sake of, the greater good. But also, I didn't want it to just be that, this crew succeeded and that's why, change was able to happen. I wanted to,
Mm.
challenge myself and also museums and institutions as a whole to think about
Hmm.
what their culpability is and how we're actually
Mm.
going to affect change in the real world, which is them making their own decision to return looted
Hmm.
art. And obviously in the book, the reasons why they make this decision is because of the pressure that's put on them, both by these heists and by the public. Um, but I think if we look at what's going on today and with the return, with the start of the return of looted art, it's because of public pressure. And so
Hmm.
I wanted to talk about
Right.
that, and I thought that that was you know the way that I wanted to come at this issue, and also I think for me a bit of a satisfying twist because all
Hmm.
heist books I think require that sort of like surprise and delight when you get to the end and the characters have pulled off you know the heist but in a way that you didn't expect them to, and so that was the way for me.
Oh yeah. I mean, and there's like a running joke in my house where I fully can't guess any twist ever. So I'm always like endlessly shocked by all things. Like even, oh, this is actually relevant. I don't remember which Fast and Furious movie it is, but whichever one, I guess this is a spoiler, but whichever one where the woman who's been working with The Rock, we learn is like a double agent. You know what I'm
Oh
talking
yeah,
about?
yeah, yeah. Of course, of course.
Yeah, so that's my favorite Fast and Furious movie, and I'm to this day still shocked by that. Did not see it coming, and I didn't see it's such a cool, slick ending in Portrait of a Thief, and you also don't let the museums off easy. Like they return the artwork, but you make it very clear it's like they're only doing this because people are really upset with them right now, and we have to remember that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you are the ideal reader and viewer for everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I am. I have one last question, but I did want to ask before. This is going into our summer Vacation Reads podcast episode, and we've talked a lot, the editors, about our positive associations with what we consider vacation reads, because it feels like this thing that, you're at the beach or somewhere and you see all of these people doing the same thing separately but together. We're all reading books. And I just feel like Portrait of a Thief is a really accessible vacation read. And I'm just wondering, like, what are your feelings about people maybe considering this a book that they'd bring on vacation with them?
I love that. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that I finished writing this book, at the start of the pandemic. I wrote it because I was, hoping for a form of escapism and just, a way to find joy among so much darkness and tragedy and grief. And so I love the idea of other people doing the same thing and taking my book on vacation
Yeah.
with them. And I think that I personally love to take books on vacation. My dream vacation is like in the shade on a beach, beautiful water, beautiful setting. All I'm doing is reading a book and admiring the scenery. And so, I love that perspective. And I think that a vacation
Yeah.
read is just, the highest of compliments, because you're on vacation. You're like in this
Yes.
beautiful place. There's all this fun, and then you choose to read a book and to let it transport you.
Totally. At the very top, we mentioned that Portrait of a Thief is being made into a Netflix series and that you're an executive producer. Are you able to share anything with us? How's that going?
I don't know how much I'm allowed to share. They had me sign a bunch of paperwork.
Cool. Okay.
But
We just won't send them the link to this episode.
yeah,
then.
yeah. But I will say that I met with them when I was in LA about a month ago, and they continue to be really excited about the book.
Awesome.
I think the reason that I chose Netflix was because they really had a commitment to emphasizing, Asian American voices, both on screen and the writer's room, on all aspects of the project. And they're really committed to making sure that the book on screen reflects, the same themes and, conversations and conflicts as in the book. And so I'm really excited. I'm keeping all my fingers crossed about, things
Yeah.
continuing to go smoothly. But
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, I can't wait. I will be eagerly awaiting the Netflix.
thank you. Me too. Me too.
This was so lovely. Thank you, listeners, for joining us for our first book club chat. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. You can find Grace online at gracedlee.com, follow her on Instagram and Twitter at gracedlee, and head to our website, writersdigest.com, for where you can purchase her book, Portrait of a Thief. Grace, it's been such a pleasure talking with you. Thanks for joining us today.
This has been so much fun. Thank you for having me.
Here's the writing prompt for our Vacation Reads episode. Write a scene or short story in which a character has to go on a trip. It could be a vacation or a business meeting or to visit family. Whatever the reason, the journey to get to the destination does not go smoothly. What goes wrong? And how does the reason for the trip and the character's feeling about that trip affect how the character responds to the bumps along the way? Thanks for listening to Writer's Digest Presents. Join us in July when we'll be talking about community, which is perfect timing for the Writers Digest annual conference in New York City. Until then, visit writersdigest.com for more writing prompts, advice, and inspiration. Email us at writers.digest@aimmedia.com to share your feedback, and join us on social media at Writers Digest to share your thoughts about vacation reads. We look forward to hearing from you.